Welcome to Red Dwarf Season 7. And if there was ever a single scene to represent the tone of this show, that would be it. That said, Season 7 has a slightly different tone than the rest of the series overall, and for this reason, they chose not to film in front of a live audience. I'll get into the reasons for that at the end, but they did play the finished product to an audience to get the responses. But in some episodes, the laughter drowned out the dialogue, so on the DVD version, some episodes have a laugh track and some don't. I just wanted to warn you in case you didn't know, since it can be a bit jarring.
Ship's log, 1.
We open on another scene that came from Red Dwarf USA, where Lister is trying to start a video journal. He gets to what happened in the previous season and tries to explain that their future selves destroyed Starbug, including the time drive.
By killing us, they killed themselves, because once we were dead, it was impossible for us to become them in the future and return in time to kill ourselves in the past, even though it was the present.
But the camera can't handle the paradox, because that's how that works.
That's the third camera this week. The machines just can't take it, sir.
So Lister starts over and just does a regular SOS type message this time.
Just past a sort of ready moon a couple of days ago. Coordinates enclosed. It's about that shape. You can't miss it.
But sadly, there have been casualties.
The laser cannon breached the main water tank and flooded Supply Deck B. No papadums, no curries. All the Indian food supplies have been totaled.
Oh my god, what's Lister gonna do?
I'll have salads.
Sir, you're in shock. You don't know what you're saying.
It's mostly played for laughs, but in a way, Lister's obsession with curry and lager makes him feel normal.
Sir, there is nothing unmanly in howling like a hungry prairie dog.
It's a link to the life he had before the events of this series. It's a form of escapism.
We'd always make time for curry night. Every Friday.
Saturday,
Sunday.
Tuesday,
Wednesday.
and Thursday.
So, however unhealthy it may be, he kind of needs it in a way.
Perhaps you could learn to love pasta.
Pasta. You sick?
Either way, of course, Rimmer and Kat are going to give him shit about it.
As a mark of respect, we thought on Sunday at 12 o'clock we could have a minute's flatulence.
Fun fact, though, the altercation with their future selves somehow resulted in an anomaly where they gained 212% more room in the cargo bay.
We should ascertain that the new structures are stable.
So Kat suggests that they could go and get the time drive if they wanted, but Rimmer thinks they should avoid time travel at all costs.
It's the only way of breaking our destiny line and ensuring we don't end up like our future selves.
Lister thinks they could do it if they're careful.
And do what?
Go back in time to an Indian takeaway and order 500 curries.
But yeah, he just wants curry.
We can't afford to take any more chances. I say the time drive stays where it is.
But they managed to convince him. By the way, check out the sets for this one. That looks really impressive for this show. So now that they're done investigating Starbug and they haven't found anything wrong with it, Kryten wants to shut himself down for a couple of hours so he can discard some old files.
This cleanup thing, how does it work exactly?
But Lister is suddenly very interested in how that works.
Why do you ask?
Just interested. Robotics. It's fascinating, isn't it?
So later, while Kryten is doing his thing, Lister sneaks in and replaces Kryten's head with one of his spare heads.
My heavens, I'm head.
So Sparehead is all for helping Lister out, but first Lister has to override his guilt chip and disable his behavior protocols. So Lister pops the hood and does all that.
No behavior protocols. Just call me badass.
Yeah, this is gonna end well. The next morning, Kryten serves an extremely decadent breakfast and... Remember this line from Polymorph?
What, so you just stick the head whisk attachment on the end and you can whip up a Spanish omelette?
But it's amazing how few people are prepared to eat them.
Well, now we get to see him do it. And now we realize why he didn't before. Also, his groinal attachment is a little more, anatomical looking than it was before. Anyway, now Kryten is suddenly agreeing to go back in time to get curry.
On reflection, I think it'd be quite safe. But sometimes you've just got to say the laws of time and space. Who gives a smeg?
He also isn't doing a very good job of hiding his lack of a guilt chip.
You bet your ass.
Kryten, can I have a word?
Yeah, there's a sight.
Get a grip or we'll be rumbled. So uptight.
And there's another one. So they get the time drive and...
We got the Taj Mahal Tandoori restaurant behind the JMC building in London.
Suddenly they can use it to go to different locations, even though the show went out of its way in the last episode to show that they couldn't. Oh well. Anyway, Kryten doesn't know how to use the time drive, so they end up in Dallas, Texas in 1963, so... Yeah, way to go. So they figure out the time and place they're in, and this wonderful conversation happens.
Wasn't that place where that American king got assassinated?
JFK.
No, it was John something, not JFK.
JFK. Like the airport.
I wonder why anyone would want to name their kid after an airport.
I love that they're about to accidentally murder a guy and it's being played for laughs.
The gunman's location was in the Texas Book Depository.
So Lister finds this cord and insists on pulling on it, so... Yeah, they just killed Lee Harvey Oswald.
What are all those people doing gathered around that giant pizza?
As always, best face goes to Rimmer.
Look at this. I think we just pulled the gunman out of the window. Hands on heads. We're here.
The other head cat. Anyway, the cops don't know what the time drive is and assume it's a weapon, so they tell them to kick it towards them, so Kryten manages to activate it with his foot. What are you shooting at? Anyway, they end up in the same location 3 years later.
All we did was save Kennedy's life.
Is that bad?
The streets are empty except for one dead guy.
Eric White.
Looks like he was trampled to death in some kind of stampede.
Just processing.
So they're now in an alternate reality where JFK wasn't assassinated. Instead, he was impeached in 1964 for having ties with the mafia. And he was sentenced to 3 years in an open prison. So J. Edgar Hoover became president.
So America had a president controlled by the mafia.
Not gonna touch that.
The USSR were allowed to install a nuclear base in Cuba.
Or that.
With a Soviet nuclear base 30 miles from the US mainland, people fled from all the major cities.
Also, they can't go back to Starbug because it doesn't exist anymore.
Kennedy's impeachment in '64 traumatized the American nation. In this reality, it was probably the Russians who were the first to land on the moon.
So, wait, going by the logic at the beginning of the episode, shouldn't the events leading you to be here have been retconned? Oh well. I like this conversation where Kat is trying to understand if JFK was good or bad.
His affairs were legendary.
And they basically tell him that it's more complicated than that.
His Achilles heel?
Kennedy's was just higher up.
What have I done, man?
Well, you've brought the 20th century to the very brink of extinction, sir. Gum?
So Rimmer asks Kryten how the hell this all happened, and Lister finally confesses.
I nicked Kryten's body. That spare head too. I removed this guilt chip.
And worst of all, the time drive isn't working.
Do you think it's because the subspace conduits have locked with the transponder calibrations and caused a major tachyon surge that has overloaded the time matrix?
No, sir. I've just been jabbing it too hard.
So they decide to set up camp for the night, and Rimmer sends Kryten out for food.
How can the same guy be an icon in one reality and a criminal in the next?
In one reality, he wasn't caught.
Then the conversation about what kind of man JFK was continues. And again, it's complicated.
But somewhere along the way, just like me, he disabled his guilt chip and discarded his behavior protocols.
I mean, hardly anyone can be put neatly into a category of all good or all bad. We all have good and bad qualities, and JFK was no exception. According to this episode, anyway.
Take you, sir. In some ways, you're bright, sensitive, and caring. In other ways, you're an irresponsible, curry-obsessed moron.
That's Lister in a nutshell. Anyway, it turns out that they haven't been eating chicken.
What is it?
It's that man we found. It's Eric.
Once again, Rimmer is glad he doesn't have to eat.
But it seemed to me that if humanoids eat chicken, then obviously they'd eat their own species.
Vegan logic.
1 minute you're down, the next you're right back up again.
On the upside, the time drive has started working again, so Lister wants to go back and fix everything.
I don't care where we go, as long as it's before we had dinner.
Back at shortly before the JFK assassination, they get Oswald to go to a different floor so they won't accidentally kill him again.
Decorators, trap on the 6th floor.
I love this. Kat says they're decorators, but they're all just sitting there playing poker. All looking totally out of place for the time period and situation, and Kryten just shields his eyes. And yet it works.
Isn't this sick? I mean, just standing by and allow the president to be killed?
Not if you're Eric White, it ain't.
So Oswald's aim isn't as good on the higher floor, and he only ends up wounding JFK. But Lister has a plan B in mind.
If we could arrange somehow for a second gunman to fire from just behind that little hill over there, covered in lawn.
You mean the grassy knoll, sir?
Also this.
Stand on the grassy knoll and shout, "Duck!"
Shoot the press? Who?
Except that none of them wants to do it. So Lister has another idea.
Just maybe there's someone who can get us out of this mess.
As Kennedy is about to be transported to jail, Lister teleports into the vehicle.
Don't be alarmed, sir, but I have a very strange tale to tell.
Kennedy basically reiterates what they've been saying about him all along. He thinks he did a good job as president, but that he also made some mistakes.
It was wrong, however, to act like an irresponsible jackass with all those women and allow my enemies to wreak havoc on our nation.
But Lister says he knows how to fix it.
How can you help?
Come with us back to Dallas in November '63. Be a second gunman, the gunman behind the grassy knoll.
That's brilliant.
Assassinate myself?
Yeah, it'll drive the conspiracy nuts crazy, but you'll never figure it out.
But naturally, Kennedy is hesitant. He still thinks that after he gets out of jail, he can still make some kind of a contribution to the world.
Where I come from, you're a liberal icon, and that's the person you should be. But if you're going to be that person, you're going to have to sacrifice your life.
Ask not what your country can do for you. Ask what you can do for your country.
Hey, that'd make a pretty neat speech, that.
It did.
So back to the Kennedy assassination again. Future Kennedy is disguised as a cop, and the Red Dwarf crew were disguised as vagrants, except Kryten. What a surreal moment this must be for Kennedy to assassinate his past self. But he does it, and is successful.
Thank you all for giving me the opportunity to be reborn.
Smeg, I forgot to ask if there are any curry houses in Dallas.
Nice mood whiplash. So 3 weeks later, I guess this is Kryten's punishment for all the problems he caused, which is pretty shitty considering that none of it is his fault, but, you know, Rimmer.
I would hate to malfunction and you not get a full refund. I mean, wouldn't that just be so annoying?
Also, Kryten doesn't seem to mind, so whatever. In the meantime, it turns out that the curry wasn't destroyed in the flood after all.
I took him. At some point in the future, I must go back to the past and bring all the curry supplies to the present. Capiche?
Oh my god, enough with the time travel weirdness.
Yes!
Also, Rimmer is about to get back at Lister too, and it's amazing.
You know, I must have passed this thing 1,000,000 times. What the hell's it for?
So apparently Starbug can separate, so it does just that, leaving Lister alone with all his curry. It's been a while since we've seen the Rimmer salute, even if this is kind of a reduced version.
Just me and 3.5 tons of curry. Fan-smeggin-tastic.
And so Lister starts eating curry sauce by sucking it off a napkin. How sad. And so ends Tikka to Ride. So, back to what I was hinting at the beginning. They decided not to film in front of a live audience for Season 7, partly so they could have more impressive sets and not have to worry about the logistics of managing that with a live audience, but also because they wanted to go for more drama this season. A lot of people don't like the idea of a lack of a live audience for Red Dwarf, but I feel that Tikka to Ride is proof that it can pay off. Visually, this episode is gorgeous. The shots inside Starbug and of course the scenes involving Kennedy's assassination. They actually considered having these sequences be in black and white to show the time period, but decided not to because it looked so good already, they didn't want anyone mistaking it for stock footage. But yeah, scenes like that one, the vast insides of Starbug, and the shot at the airport obviously couldn't have been done if a live audience had to be taken into consideration. Also, for how goofy this episode starts, it ends up being pretty heavy near the end. I do like how they portrayed JFK as a complex and flawed human being who redeems himself in the end. I genuinely tear up at the point where he vanishes. Also, fun fact, apparently there were 3 vagrants nearby during the Kennedy assassination, and conspiracy theorists like to play with the idea that they were involved somehow. I suppose you could argue that Lister is somewhat out of character in this episode. They definitely exaggerate his obsession with curry, where he's willing to sabotage Kryten's body to get some, despite him normally humanizing Kryten. But I find it generally funny, and even if I didn't, just about everything else in this episode makes up for it. This is probably one of my favorite episodes overall. As for aesthetic changes for Season 7, Lister and Rimmer look about the same, and Kat's look is slightly different again, which I'll go into in the Cat videos, of course. With Kryten, they decided to kind of highlight the angles on his face, and I don't quite care for the effect. I don't think it's a bad idea, I just think it could have been a little more subtle. Maybe have a bit more transition there instead of having sharp lines, or maybe just make the lines a color that pops a little less. I think this is the only season where he looks like that, so maybe I'm not alone there. So if you don't know, the next episode would have been a cat-centric episode called Identity Within, except that it was never made and only exists as a narrated animatic. I was going to cover that next, but I think it's more appropriate to cover it in the cat videos. So next up is Stoke Me a Clipper. See you then.
You have altered the entire course of civilization from the 20th century onwards. You brought the world to the brink of nuclear war, and worst of all...
Oh, no, I still haven't had the curry.